The following is intended for mature audiences. Welcome to a world where darkness and mystery converge. Navigate the depths of horror and true crime and join a society beyond the ordinary, where buzzworthy topics, paranormal tales, and listener-submitted experiences blend into a realm of the unknown. You have crossed into a place where the unusual and the terrifying are just the beginning. My name is Ralph Anthony, and welcome to the Scream Society podcast.
Hello, Screamers.
Welcome into another edition of this variety podcast from hell. In the dawn of the magnification of Nicki the Fraud Minaj, what the actual fuck is happening in the world right now? You know what? I'm not in the mood to go into all that. This time around, we are here to... true crime isn't something that should be part of a celebration. Let's just say an honor. In honor of the release of a new film from my favorite horror franchise, slasher franchise, Scream, I've got a full episode of true crime covering 3 cases that were inspired by the films, real-life copycats. I'll get into those soon, but first, let's get into Sinister Subjects. Alright, so Sinister Subjects is getting a little stabby today. No crazy political talk, no unhinged beauty trends this episode. Like I said, with Scream 7 looming on the horizon, I figured now was the perfect time to take a quick detour and talk about something the franchise is honestly legendary for, the kills. And before anyone freaks out, let me be extremely clear here. I'm not a sicko. I'm a film lover. This isn't about glorifying violence. It's about appreciating like the tension, the pacing, shot choices, and just how these moments are crafted to make us uncomfortable in the best possible way. The Scream franchise isn't just about body counts, it's about how those deaths are staged, what they say about the killers, and how they push the story forward. So this list is purely for fun, film appreciation, and honestly, anticipation. Because if Scream 7 doesn't come out swinging, I'll be personally offended, okay? So let's get into my top 10 best kills in the Scream franchise.
Number 10. Casey Becker, Scream 1996.
So I have to start here. You already know, or maybe you don't. The first film ever opens up with a very high-profile actor, Drew Barrymore. You may have heard of her, playing high school teen Casey Becker, whose parents are out and she's preparing to watch a scary movie. And then she gets a call and starts talking with the killer, who starts to play a game. Her boyfriend is then gutted in front of her. Then Casey is stabbed multiple times and ultimately gutted off screen by Billy and Stu. That's my theory, because no way could one person do all of this. And then we get that reveal. Her body hanging from the tree. It's very graphic. It's shocking. It's a way to open the film. And what makes this work isn't what we see, it's what we don't. The phone call, her parents being feet away, the sound of her trying to breathe. It's pure psychological horror. Drew Barrymore acts the house down for this scene, and the predator playing with its prey is just so terrifying. This kill really set the tone for the entire franchise. Actually, for the entire late 90s slasher renaissance that bled well into the millennium. And had we only had the original trilogy, this one would be a lot lower. But blood and guts don't get you the top spot here, at least for my list.
Number 9. Olivia Morris, Scream 4.
This one is just brutal. This character, Olivia, is home alone while her mom is at her boyfriend's house. The killer phones Olivia's friends who live next door. That would be Jill and Kirby. When the killer reveals he's hiding in Olivia's closet, she's stabbed in the back, gutted off screen, stabbed repeatedly in the stomach, and then her head is smashed through a window. All while Jill and Kirby and even Sydney are watching from across the street. It's fast, messy, and honestly shocking in a way Scream 4 doesn't always get credit for. There's no heroic moment, although Sydney does try to run into the line of fire, but is unfortunately too late. It's just chaos. And with Jill being revealed to be the killer in the end, this one just feels even more messed up after. Personally, I felt Wes Craven introduced this brutality back into the franchise after the practically bloodless previous installment.
Number 8. Vince Schneider, Scream 2022.
Quick, clean, and effective. When the franchise introduced Vince Schneider, the nephew of Stu Macher, fans like me thought we would get more backstory to the Macher lore. Well, we were wrong there. Technically, being the first kill of this installment, Ghostface slashes Vince's neck in a parking lot and it's over before you can process it. There's no chase scene, there's no struggle, just a puncture to the neck and it's over. Some complain that the film didn't give Kyle Gallner enough time with his character to really show off his acting chops, and I kind of agree with that. I mean, watch the first 10 minutes of Smile 2 and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I like this one because it feels so ominous. From Ghostface gliding in front of the screen practically to the short and quick knife jab to the neck. Like, I genuinely feel like this is one of Ghostface's coolest kills.
Number 7. Jason Carvey, Scream 6.
This one is wild because it's a Ghostface getting absolutely demolished by another Ghostface in the first 10 minutes. So after stabbing who the audience believes is the opening kill to Scream 6, Samara Weaving, who is probably one of the best screamers in Hollywood, Tony Revolori's Jason unmasks himself after he kills her, leaving the audience stunned that we are unmasking this film's main antagonist so soon. It's not like a typical Scream film. Well, we were wrong here because after following Jason and just seeing how unbothered by what he just did, we follow him to his apartment where he receives a call from the actual main killer. Taunted, then, stabbed. He's stabbed repeatedly and then gutted. The sound design does all the work here, and honestly, hearing a killer panic, it hits differently. I really enjoyed it. Plus, we get a great line. When Jason mentioned something about finishing the movie, the killer responds, "Who gives a fuck about movies?"
Number 6. Officer Richards, Scream 2.
Okay, I'm a sucker for practical effects, okay? When the two officers who are hired to follow and watch over Sydney, they are instructed to leave town, and while Sydney and her college friend Hallie are in the back of an unmarked police car, at a stoplight, Ghostface breaks the window, slashes the driver's throat, and takes over the wheel, with Officer Richards jumping in front, threatening to shoot Ghostface. Then he drives the vehicle right into Richards. This is probably one of the biggest, budgety looking scenes. You can tell that there was a lot of rehearsal that went into this, a lot of stunt work. I mean, there was someone literally riding on the hood of the car as the killer drove it. It's just chaos. It's adrenaline fueled, and then they crash the car in this construction area, and Officer Richards is impaled through the back of the head with the pipe. Yes, there are some parts where you can tell that it is obviously not a real person on the hood, but you know what? I appreciate that. I like that aspect in film, practical effects, using dummies, using whatever you can that's human made it's so cool. It's really cool to me. And in the aftermath, how the body looked, it was just so, I sound like a psychopath here, okay? It was so cool. Yeah, this guy had a pipe through his head. It looked so cool. Also, this is one of few kills in the franchise that uses its environment, and it's brutal. Plus, it really sets up one of the franchise's best nail-biting scenes.
Number 5. Tatum Riley, Scream 1996.
Still one of the most upsetting deaths in the franchise, if you ask me. Tatum Riley, played by the iconic Rose McGowan, goes down to the basement for beer at Stu Macher's house party. There, she runs into Ghostface and gives us one of the most quotable scenes of the film. The killer reveals that he means business by slicing her forearm, and she puts up a pretty good fight until she tries to crawl through a doggy door that's built into her garage door. The killer uses this as an opportunity to crush her head with the garage door. And it's the slow realization that kills you. Tatum fights hard. She almost gets out. And that's why this one hurts. Plus, Rose McGowan has recently mentioned that she improvised a line during the scene. Her final line of this film is her crying out for her mom.
Number 4. Deputy Anthony Perkins, Scream 4.
Another fast and to the point death here. While on stakeout outside of Jill Roberts' home, Deputy Anthony Perkins is stabbed in the head by Jill and left to bleed out. What makes this kill work for me is who's holding the knife. Jill is supposed to be the final girl, and instead she's cold, efficient, and cruel. And if you want to add more, she's fucking crazy. The killer stands and watches, and the deputy struggles to walk straight and punches at the air before falling to the ground.
Number 3. Wes Hicks, Scream 2022.
The tension in this scene is insane. Wes Hicks, played by Wallows frontman Dylan Minetti, is home alone while his mom picks up dinner, and they bring the suspense for this scene. It's very classic horror, like what's behind the refrigerator door when it's open, what's behind the cabinet door, what's behind this door. It's so classic with all of the fake outs, the silence, the slow build up. The fact that his mother, Sheriff Judy, is actually outside on the walkway dead in broad daylight. This is Scream doing suspense right, if you ask me. Not to mention the great effect of Ghostface slowly pushing the knife through Wes's neck at a very intimate distance. And what's terrifying is knowing the last thing Wes saw here were the dark eye sockets of the Ghostface mask.
Number 2. Annika Kayoko, Scream 6.
Alright, so first introduced as this charismatic Blackmore University freshman and Mindy Meeks Martin's loving girlfriend, Annika Kayoko was one of the few new characters you felt genuinely connected to before the slaughter began. I really liked her. She was cute, she was kind of quirky, she was kind of badass, and then they kill her off. So after Ghostface crashes the party at Sam and Tara's New York City apartment, Annika is stabbed through the stomach as she tries to protect Mindy. She survives that initial strike, but just barely. And there's a lot of fan division with this scene of how this character could have survived, because when the killer inserts the knife, he twists it and just does all kinds of stuff inside of her. It's a movie, babe. Now, with the front door blocked, hot boy next door, Danny Brackett, rigs a makeshift escape bridge across with a ladder between apartments. Everyone makes it across safely, obviously, except Annika. At the worst possible moment, the killer breaks into the room and violently shakes the ladder while she's holding on for dear life. And in a split second, Annika's hands slip and she plummets several stories to the alley below. The camera doesn't really shy away either, because it shows her head strike a dumpster. It's probably one of the most graphic and haunting shots in the entire film. Like hearing Mindy screaming and just seeing the aftermath. It's really terrifying. And I think one of the best cinematic moments of the franchise. Before I get into my top, I do have 3 honorable mentions here, and this episode is turning into a Watch Mojo episode here. Shout out Watch Mojo. Maureen Evans, Scream 2. I think this one shocked me as a child. Public, humiliating, it's absolutely nightmare fuel. Maureen Evans, who is portrayed by Jada Pinkett Smith, her death is not really the goriest in the franchise, but I think it might be the most uncomfortable, and one that really leaves you feeling just really sad after. Richie Kirsch, Scream 2022. Okay, so overkill, Yes. Catharsis? Even more yes. After revealing himself as one of the ghost faces, Richie, portrayed by the very charming Jack Quaid, is taken down in a savagely personal execution. I mean, Melissa Barrera's character Sam stabs him through the mouth. She shuts him up as he's saying this really smug monologue, and from there, it's not just murder, it's honestly rage therapy at this point. He's stabbed over 20 times in the chest, each one feeling like a release of everything that the characters and the audience even have been holding in. And just when you think it's over, Sam slits his throat for good measure. She also does the iconic blade wipe with her bare hands, and this one screams badass. And also, never fuck with the daughter of a serial killer. Amber Freeman, Scream 2022. There's a lot from Scream 2022 on this list. Unhinged, excessive, iconic, fully deserved is what I have to say about this one. Amber Freeman does not go down easy, and honestly good. As she takes on franchise legends Sydney and Gail in the Mocker House kitchen. First, she's shot. Then she's set on fire. And somehow she's still not done. In her final moment, just when Amber pops back up for one last scare, she's shot on the side of the head by who else than Jenna Ortega. It's brutal and so theatrical. It's borderline comedic in its escalation here. And that's exactly why it works for me. Enjoy that torch.
And now for the number one spot. Drum roll, please. Cece Cooper, Scream 2.
Played by Sarah Michelle Gellar at the height of her fame. Not that she isn't still famous. Cece instantly feels like she should survive, right? Which is exactly why this kill hits as hard as it does, at least for me. It starts with one of the franchise's best cat and mouse phone calls. Ghost-faced toys with Cece circling the house while she's alone. She's isolated, distracted, and slowly realizing that she's not as safe as she thought. The tension here is just immaculate. And what follows is this desperate chase through a sorority house, Omega Bega Data, with Cece sprinting up staircases until she is then stabbed multiple times, pushed through a window, and thrown off of a balcony. And I think for me, Cece Cooper represents the moment Scream reminded audiences again that no one is safe here. Not this huge star, not the fan favorite, not the character who feels like the final girl. And for me, this death scene is really the blueprint for the perfect Scream kill, right? Now, I played a little game with some of my Instagram followers called This Kill, That Kill to see which one of the top 10 kills they preferred. And the Scream fans spoke here. Y'all really came through. Shout out to all 120 of you that participated here. So 50% of you preferred Deputy Perkins' kill from Scream 4, and 50% of you preferred Wes Hicks's Scream 2022 kill. But not all of the polls were as tied, because I have another one here. Annika Kayoko from Scream 6 only got 14% of votes, while Cece Cooper from Scream 2, my number one pick, had 86%. Vince Schneider from Scream 2022 had 36%, while Jason Carvey from Scream 6 had 64%. Officer Richards from Scream 2 only got 21%, while Tatum Riley from Scream 96 got 79%. As she should. She is a legend, that is. And finally, Casey Becker, Scream 96, got 86% of you voting for it, while Olivia Morris's death from Scream 4 only had 14%. Let's take a break. 3 terrifying but true real-life Scream copycat murders when we come back.
From the blood-soaked depths of late-night horror comes a collection so shocking, so scandalous, it'll make your wardrobe scream. Want my face on your chest? Or maybe you just want to rep the cult, the logo, the legend, the Scream Society? Don't just listen to the nightmare, wear it. Rep it, live it. Get it now before it gets you. Head to scream-society.printify.me and rep Scream Society merch.
Welcome into Terrifying But True, the segment where I choose one random true crime, dark history, or paranormal case and do a deep dive on it. However, with the release of a new Scream film, I found myself thinking about something that always comes up whenever this franchise resurfaces, every single time. And that is a conversation around copycat crimes, copycat killers, whatever you want to call them. As a fan of the genre, I won't be approaching this in the tired, pearl-clutching video games and movies rot your brain way, but in a very real, documented, court-recorded way where people explicitly say, this movie inspired what we did. This franchise is iconic. It's my favorite franchise, and the true crime elements are what basically prompted me to start this podcast. And in case you've been living under a rock, the Scream franchise is basically this slasher horror series that knows it's a slasher series. No, it's not the Scary Movie franchise. That's different. Scream follows a pattern of masked killings connected to past events, but what makes it different from Halloween or Friday the 13th is that the characters are very aware of horror movies and the rules that usually come with them. The movies mix scares with humor really smoothly. They'll make a joke about horror cliches and then immediately prove why those cliches exist. Underneath all that, Scream is about trauma, legacy, and how violence keeps repeating itself when people turn it into entertainment. And as the franchise goes on, it keeps updating itself, moving from making fun of horror movies in general to commenting on sequels, reboots, franchises, and even fandom or culture. With the fourth film having the most relevant commentary on culture, in my opinion, the mask stays the same unless you're the MTV TV show. But the themes evolve with the times. Overall, it's smart, bloody, self-aware horror that somehow manages to be fun, intense, and kind of messy all at once. And that's why, in my opinion, it still works decades later. But as fun and iconic as Scream is, there are moments where fiction didn't just influence real life, it bled into it. And this episode, I'm going to talk about 3 cases where that line completely soaks through. Let's start with one that made national headlines in the late 90s. When the unthinkable becomes reality, we find ourselves questioning everything, as some stories are too terrifying but true. This one is often referred to in the media as the Scream murder, though interestingly, the courtroom was basically forbidden from calling it that. This is the murder of Gina Castillo. Now, Gina Castillo was 37 years old and living in Lakewood, California. On the afternoon of January 13th, 1998, she was at home when she was attacked and brutally murdered. The people responsible were not intruders or strangers who slipped in unnoticed. They were members of her own family. Her 16-year-old son, Mario Padilla, and his 14-year-old cousin, Samuel Ramirez. The attack, it was vicious and prolonged. Gina was held down while the boys assaulted her using 4 knives and a screwdriver. She was stabbed a total of 45 times and somehow, unbelievably, she did not die immediately. Badly wounded and bleeding out, Gina managed to reach a telephone and dial 911. The operator stayed on the line as Gina struggled to speak, gasping for air, and during the trial, jurors would later be forced to listen to the recording of her final moments. Her voice breaking as she told the dispatcher, "My son, he's 16. He just stabbed me. I'm bleeding. Oh, I'm bleeding." And that recording became one of the most devastating and damning pieces of evidence in the case, not just because of the brutality it captured, but because there was absolutely no question about who was responsible. Gina Castillo died shortly after making that call because of her son. What the jury never officially heard, however, was the motive. The part of the story that would turn this case into a national media obsession. During police investigations, both boys confessed that the killing was part of a larger plan inspired by Hollywood slasher films. Investigators learned that Mario Padilla and Samuel Ramirez had been watching Scream and Scream 2 obsessively They told police the films gave them both the idea and courage to kill. During the murder, the boys stole $150 from Gina Castillo, explaining that the money was intended to buy 2 ghost face costumes, along with a voice changer device so they could disguise their voices. This was not meant to be a one-time act. The boys planned to put on the costumes and go on this killing spree around their neighborhood. Padilla had reportedly even selected a future victim who was a female classmate, specifically because she resembled Drew Barrymore. Investigators discovered that the boys had discussed a legal backup plan if they were caught. They intended to mimic the plot of the 1996 film Primal Fear, in which a killer fakes multiple personality disorder to escape responsibility. In other words, this wasn't just violence, it was rehearsed. This was scripted and borrowed from movies, like a set of instructions almost. Now, naturally, the public expected the trial to turn into a full-blown debate about violent media and children, but instead, the courtroom went in the exact opposite direction here. Los Angeles Superior Court Judge John Chirosky aggressively shut down that entire narrative. He ruled that Scream was irrelevant to the facts of the homicide, barred any mention of the movie, the costumes, or the Hollywood motive, issued a gag order, banned cameras from the courtroom, and even refused to allow the phrase "scream murder" to be spoken in his presence. He made it clear he wanted the case tried as, in his words, murder and nothing else. Defense psychologist Madeline Levine was allowed to testify about the boys' mental states, but she was heavily restricted in how much responsibility she could place on the film itself. Outside the courtroom, however, she was far more direct, later stating, "You need a cat to copy. In this case, Scream is that cat." The verdicts came quickly. Mario Padilla and Samuel Ramirez were both convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Padilla, who was 16 at the time of the crime, was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And this is where the case stops being just a horrific crime, and it really becomes this legal landmark. Because Padilla's case had remained active for decades due to sweeping changes in how the U.S. justice system treats juvenile offenders. Everything began in 2012 with the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Miller v. Alabama, which ruled that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles are unconstitutional. Judges must consider a child's youth, immaturity, and potential for change. As a result, Padilla's original sentence was vacated. In 2014, the same court resentenced him, once again imposing life without parole. Padilla appealed that sentence as well. And while that appeal was ongoing, California voters passed Proposition 57 in 2016. The law removed prosecutors' ability to automatically charge minors as adults, requiring a judge to decide that question in a transfer hearing. The state argued that Padilla couldn't benefit from this change because his conviction was already final. That argument collapsed in 2022 when the California Supreme Court issued its ruling in People v. Padilla. The court agreed with Padilla's legal team that because his original sentence had been vacated, his conviction was technically non-final. That meant Proposition 57 applied retroactively. But as of 2025, Padilla has not been exonerated. However, he has been granted a retroactive juvenile transfer hearing. If the court determines he should have been tried as a juvenile back in 1998, the system may have no legal authority to continue holding him, since juvenile jurisdiction ends at age 25. If the court rules that he was correctly tried as an adult, his conviction will stand, but he will likely be eligible for a youth offender parole hearing. And what's crazy is his case now affects hundreds of juvenile offenders across California, all stemming from the murder of Gina Castillo. I think the ultimate horror of this case was the motive being so cut and dry, right? Like these boys just wanted to recreate what was on screen. I've seen some commentators on Reddit as well discussing this case, blaming the parents for allowing their children to watch these movies, and that argument has some validity, but it rubs me the wrong way, especially in Gina Castillo's case. Like, we don't want to victim blame here, but I think it's just another case where I'm just going to have to leave that judgment up to you. But if you want to share your thoughts on this case, let me know. The link will be in the description. For this next case, we're taking a trip across the pond. Harrogate is the kind of town people describe as quiet, picturesque, almost untouched by serious violence, which is exactly why what happened there in January of 1999 sent shockwaves through the entire community. Ashley Murray was just 13 years old. On the night of Sunday, January 17th, he was taken to Burke Crag, a remote nature reserve overlooking Harrogate, by two people he trusted, his friends Daniel Gill, who was 14, and Robert Fuller, who was 15. Ashley had been close friends with Daniel Gill for 3 years. They were the kind of friends who stayed at each other's houses, spent weekends together, and felt inseparable. Robert Fuller, who was a year older, wasn't as close to Ashley, but he was tightly bonded with Gill. What Ashley didn't know was that earlier that evening, the boys had been at the home of Paul Orens, a convicted Harrogate drug dealer. While there, they had been watching Scream. According to the evidence later that was presented in court, Orens' home was an unhealthy environment where drugs and knives and talk of black magic were normalized. Investigators and psychologists would later say this atmosphere played a significant role in what followed, blurring the line between fantasy and reality for these two young boys. At some point after leaving Orens' home, Gill and Fuller convinced Ashley to go with them to the isolated beauty spot at Burke Crag. Once there, the situation turned violent. One of the boys stabbed Ashley in the cheek so forcefully that the blade passed straight through his face, knocking out his teeth. He managed to get up and run, but he lost his shoe, fell, and they caught up to him. Ashley was then jumped and stabbed 18 times. One of the wounds narrowly missed the largest blood vessel in his brain by just a millimeter. A difference so small it likely meant the difference between life and death for him. He suffered a collapsed lung, a fractured rib, and began to succumb to hypothermia as his body weakened. Ashley later told the court that Daniel Gill stabbed him in the head and only stopped when Ashley pretended to be dead. Robert Fuller prevented him from escaping and stabbed him in the arm. After the attack, the boys wrapped Ashley's body in a bin bag, left him exposed in the cold, and ran away, believing that they had killed him. But see, they hadn't. Too injured to move, trapped in thick brambles, he relied on survival techniques he'd learned from television. Hell yeah. Licking rainwater off his jacket to stay hydrated, conserving energy, waiting. Very smart boy. Meanwhile, his mother had began searching for him. She even went to Daniel Gill's house, worried and desperate for answers, and Gill told her Ashley had stormed off after an argument during a football game. Ashley was still where they left him, bleeding out for 40 hours. 40 hours! Just gravely injured and barely alive until he was discovered by an elderly man who was out walking his dogs around the area. And against all odds, Ashley survived. The case immediately drew national attention, particularly because of the ages involved and the alleged influence of Scream. During the investigation, drawings of Ghostface, along with pictures of knives, were found in one of the boys' school books. These images were shown in court as evidence of the violent fantasies the boys had been consuming. At trial, Ashley testified about how he had been lured to Burke Crag by his friends, people he trusted, and how the attack unfolded. The court also heard extensive testimony about Paul Orens and the influence he had over Gill and Fuller. It was revealed that Arons had given Gil drugs and exposed him to black magic practices, convincing him that the gods wanted Ashley to die. Arons appeared as a witness during the trial, denying any involvement in the attack, though he conceded that he had provided an unhealthy and inappropriate environment for the boys. Judge Arthur Meyerson accepted that Gil and Fuller both had behavioral difficulties that made them particularly vulnerable to Arons's influence. He stated that their exposure to drugs, knives, and this so-called black magic and violent media, including Scream, which they had watched at Arons' home, combined to dangerously blur the boundary between fantasy and reality. Despite both boys denying attempted murder, they were found guilty at Whole Crown Court and sentenced to just 5 years detention for attempted murder. Judge Meyerson described them as a serious risk to the public, adding that had they been adults, they would have faced sentences of 10 years or more. He also made the unusual decision to allow the boys to be publicly named, stating that it was in the public interest. Judge Meyerson really made some very interesting choices during this trial. I do have to say that. Now, Ashley Murray spent 9 months in the hospital, undergoing multiple operations as doctors fought to save his life. His recovery was long and painful, but he survived what should have been a fatal attack carried out by people he once called friends. Now, years later, Ashley Murray would finally break his silence, not to relive what had happened to him, but because he feared the system had learned nothing. More than a decade after he was left for dead, Ashley Murray spoke publicly as the Attorney General announced a review of the sentences given to the boys who attacked him. At the time, Daniel Gill and Robert Fuller had received minimum sentences of 5 years, and to Ashley, who was older at this time and able to fully process what exactly happened, felt that that punishment never really fit the crime. And I do agree with that. The consequences of that decision followed Ashley long after trial ended, because when the boys were released from prison, he stopped leaving his house almost entirely. For nearly a year, fear dictated his life. Seeing Fuller again only reinforced that fear. Ashley described him as aggressive, unchanged, someone who gave no indication that he ever felt remorse. But despite everything, Ashley had been clear about one thing. He believes his attackers and others like them should face longer sentences, but he didn't support public naming or vigilante punishment. Because for Ashley Murray, justice was never about revenge. It was about making sure no one else is left bleeding in the woods while the system looks the other way. And then, years later, came this really devastating twist. 13 years after surviving being left for dead, Ashley Murray died in an entirely different tragedy. On July 14th, 2012, Ashley, then 27 years old, was driving alone in a Porsche Boxster when the car crashed while overtaking another vehicle. The vehicle then struck a tree, which then killed him. And that ends this case on this tragic, ironic tone, right? And when doing research on this one, I was so amazed of Ashley's survival. And then when I got to the details of the car accident, it was just this very strange feeling. Like it was so weird. Like I have never really felt this way about a case. It felt empty. I was like, that's it? How? What? Life is so unfair sometimes. Now, before ending the segment with probably one of the most notable Scream copycat murders, I need a breather here. Let's take a break.
Are you tired of the same old true crime podcasts? Does it seem like horror podcasts are endless? Not sure which one to choose? Well, I've got you covered.
All right, can we stop? Hi, my name's Ralph, and I'll be your guide through what I like to call a variety show straight from hell. Welcome to the Scream Society. From true crime, crazy extremists, conspiracy theories, to the wildest buzzworthy topics, maybe some spine-tingling horror stories and supernatural phenomena to darken your day, I dissect it all and tell it like it is. The Scream Society. Dare to be a part of the show? Share your personal horror stories and paranormal experiences at beacons.ai/The Scream Society. Join the society and follow on Instagram and TikTok at Scream Society Podcast. The Scream Society. Available on all podcast platforms. Continuing with my Scream copycat cases, the final case here is the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddard, a 16-year-old girl who trusted the wrong people in a place where she would have been safe on a night that started out painfully normal. There's no mystery about who did this, there's no question about motive, and there's no ambiguity about planning, because the people responsible recorded themselves explaining exactly what they were about to do. Let's get into it.
There should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but hell, you restrict somebody from it, they're gonna want it more.
Cassie Jo Stoddard was 16 years old. She lived in Pocatello, Idaho, and by every account, from friends, family, and teachers, she was kind, trusting, and painfully normal. She was the type of teenager who did what she was supposed to do. She helped family. She followed rules. She assumed the people around her meant her no harm. On September 22nd, 2006, Cassie agreed to house sit for her aunt and uncle while they were out of town. The house was located in a quiet subdivision, the kind of place that feels safe by default. Cassie had stayed there before. There was nothing about that night that should have raised any alarms. That evening, Cassie's boyfriend, Matt Beckham, came over to keep her company. Also joining them were two of Matt's friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamick. Both boys were also 16 years old. They were classmates, they were familiar faces, and most importantly, they were trusted, unfortunately. What Cassie did not know was that by the time Brian and Tori arrived at the house, they had already decided that she was going to die. See, earlier that day, before ever stepping foot inside the home, Brian Draper and Tori Adamick had begun documenting their plan on this digital camera. These were not vague statements or dark jokes taken out of context here. These were direct, intentional recordings where they laid out what they were about to do. Brian spoke openly into the camera about wanting to kill someone. He stated that they were going to murder Cassie. Tori stood beside him nodding, adding commentary, feeding into the excitement. They referred to it as their first kill, implying there would be more. They talked about wanting to do it like in Scream, framing the act as something cinematic rather than real.
We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddard. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I mean, like, holy shit, dude.
I'm horny just thinking about it.
Hell yeah.
This is where you can hear it in their voices, the excitement, the anticipation, the lack of fear. They were smiling, they were laughing, they were energized. This was not panic or impulse. This was their fantasy turning into intent. That night inside the house, everything appeared normal on the surface, and this part matters because while Cassie was walking them through the home, Brian Draper quietly unlocked the basement door. Cassie didn't notice, Matt didn't notice, and nothing about the moment felt threatening. It just felt like kids hanging out. The four of them eventually settled into the living room and started watching Kill Bill Volume 2. And at some point before the movie ended, Draper and Adamick stood up and said that they were leaving to go see another movie at the theater. They said their goodbyes and walked out the front door. Cassie had no idea that two of the people that were just sitting next to her had already rehearsed her death in their minds.
I was 9:50. September 22nd, 2006. We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I unlocked the back doors, so it's all locked. Now we just gotta wait.
Not long after the boys left, something strange happened. The lights in the house suddenly went out. Cassie was unsettled, understandably, but not panicking. Matt noticed something else that didn't sit right with him. One of the dogs kept staring toward the basement stairs, growling and barking like it sensed someone was down there. Remember earlier when I mentioned that the boys unlocked the door as they were getting a tour of the home? Well, down in the basement, Draper and Adamick had re-entered the house through the unlocked door. They were wearing dark gloves, dark clothing, and white painted masks. They were armed, they were hiding. At one point, they even tried to lure Cassie and Matt downstairs by making noises. When that didn't work, they flipped a circuit breaker off again, hoping someone would come down to fix it, but Cassie didn't. Matt could tell Cassie was scared, so he called his mother and asked if he could stay the night with her. She said no, but she offered something else. She told him Cassie could come stay at their house instead, and she would bring her back in the morning, but Cassie declined. She felt responsible for the house. Like I said earlier, she was someone who played by the rules, a very kind person, very responsible person. And in this moment, she felt responsible for the home. She was being paid to be there, and she didn't want to leave the animals alone. Now, around 10:30 p.m., Matt's mother came and picked him up, leaving Cassie alone in the house. From the basement, Draper and Adamick heard Matt leave, and this was a moment that they were waiting for. After Matt was gone, the boys shut the lights off again. Cassie still didn't come downstairs, and eventually they decided to stop waiting. Draper was armed with a dagger-style knife. Adamick carried a hunting knife. They came up from the basement, moved quietly through the house, and staged one final scare. Draper slammed a closet door at the top of the stairs. Cassie was lying on the couch in the living room, and then they attacked her. Cassie was stabbed approximately 30 times, with at least 12 of the wounds classified as potentially fatal. The attack was fast, it was violent, and overwhelming. There was no prolonged struggle, no chance to escape, although Cassie did put up somewhat of a fight.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. That felt like it wasn't real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight.
Okay.
Now, after the murder, Brian and Tori fled the scene. They disposed of the weapon and discarded evidence. Then they went home, changed clothes, and prepared for school the next morning. Cassie's body wouldn't be discovered until 2 days later, when her aunt and uncle returned home and found her. But get this, before she was found, she was reported missing, and her killers inserted themselves directly into the aftermath. They cried with friends, they hugged classmates, they comforted Matt, like nothing had ever happened. Oh, everything's fine, right? Brian was described as visibly distraught, while Tori spoke openly about how worried he was about Cassie, despite knowing exactly where she was and how they left her. But police started to catch on, because they started noticing inconsistencies almost immediately. Their stories didn't align. Their behavior was very performative and obvious, and eventually investigators recovered the digital camera. And that's all the evidence they need. The videos told the entire story. During interrogation, Brian Draper confessed and described the murder in very graphic detail. He spoke about it without emotion though, and at times he referred to it as being exciting. At trial, the jury was forced to watch the videos. They saw two teenagers gleefully documenting a planned murder. They listened as Brian referred to the killing as fun. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. And both boys were convicted of first-degree murder. Brian Draper was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tori Adamek received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, though multiple appeals and sentence challenges have since been denied, as they should. Nearly 2 decades after the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, both Draper and Adamek are still serving their life sentences without the possibility of parole at the Idaho State Correctional Institution near Kuna, Idaho. They have not been released, and there's no indication of that changing in the near future. Brian Draper, who was 16 at the time of the murder, gave a 2024 interview in which he said he feels regret and reflected on how his feelings of insignificance and alienation played a role in his actions. But he also acknowledged he doesn't expect forgiveness. Tori Adamek, on the other hand, has been denied multiple appeals over the years. He and his legal team have challenged his sentence on several grounds, including claims of ineffective assistance of counsel and that a life sentence for a juvenile offender amounts to cruel and unusual punishment. But Idaho courts and Idaho Supreme Court have repeatedly affirmed his conviction and sentence. His most recent appeal was denied as recently as March 2022. Unlike some juvenile justice cases in other states or countries, Idaho courts have not applied more recent Supreme Court juvenile sentencing reforms to offer him parole eligibility, largely because the courts have decided the brutality and the planning of the crime justify the life sentences. And what makes the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart so deeply disturbing is not just the violence, but the intent behind it. This was not about anger. This was not about revenge. This was not even about Cassie herself. She was chosen because she was accessible, because she trusted them, because she fit the role that they wanted to cast. They did not see her as a person. They saw her as this character. Cases like Gina Castillo, Ashley Murray, and Cassie Jo Stoddart get lumped into conversations about movies and media and moral panic because I think it's easier, right? That's easier than confronting the real problem here. Blaming horror films is simple. It's easy. It gives people something external to point at. But horror didn't do this. People did. And there's always a choice. I always say that. There's always a choice. And to me, what these cases actually show us is intent, planning, rehearsal. The moment where someone decides another person's life is disposable and then follows through. And what sticks with me the most isn't just the brutality, it's who pays the price afterward. Survivors who stop leaving their homes. Families who lose children and never get them back. Communities that are forever altered and traumatized. Meanwhile, the system keeps trying to decide whether accountability and compassion can coexist. I will say, and maybe controversial, but I don't think the answer is pretending that these acts are less serious because of age. And I'll leave it at that. Let's move on. Let's get into Ralph versus the Rot, where I react to your stories, experiences, situationships even, and answer your questions while doing my best to give you perspective and or a little advice. To submit, simply email screamsocietypodcast@gmail.com. My inbox is always open over on Instagram at Scream Society Podcast. Remember, mostly everything remains anonymous. Let's just do a couple questions here. Hey bro, what are your memories of Scream? Mine was at my mom's boyfriend's house. They were getting it on in the room and left us to fend for ourselves. So we ate junk and watched Scream 2. From then, I was hooked. Loving the pod, man. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. I'm glad everyone enjoyed themselves that night. Mine was at my grandma on my mom's side's house, who I was visiting, and it was like a barbecue and everyone was talking about this new movie where you have to guess who the killer is. And we ended up watching it on pay-per-view, and I sat there watching, terrified, and somehow I was so mesmerized as well by this little film Scream. I think I was like 6 or 7. Then my dad bought the VHS and all my cousins would talk about it. And I lived with my dad and my other grandma at that time. My parents are split, but I just remember always requesting to watch it with my dad because he had this really cool sound system, and I thought he was the coolest person. And yeah, I have very, very, very fond memories of that movie growing up. And then as I got older, I lost interest after the series originally ended after the third. And then my obsession resurfaced after Scream 4, which came out in 2011, I believe, and so on and so forth. But here I am covering cases about children watching violent movies, and here my parents were showing me these violent movies. We are nuts. Why do you hate people who use AI so much? Your tone seems very pointed. No, I'm kidding. It's not that I hate the people. I hate the idea of someone, especially creators, going into these apps, entering a prompt, then getting a very half-assed generated image that goes more viral than actual authentic content. Like, there's no creativity there. Maybe that's because my stuff, it doesn't do that well, so I'm a little salty. But still, it's very discouraging. We are in a very discouraging creative space in society at the moment, and I'm just a bitch that uses Photoshop and Adobe Express and filters like oil paint and adds clip art to it. Like, but still, that's creating to me. I'm still creating something. That's still being creative, and I couldn't even imagine how actual talented artists are feeling. And another thing, those of us who are out here complaining about AI, I don't see some of you out here supporting smaller artists either. Sometimes the creative world is just a bunch of bullshit, honestly. But if it's just someone having fun, go off, I guess. I mean, if harming the world is what you really want, then go for it. And there was actually some pushback on Scream 7 promotion using Meta AI, which I was like, really? Why are we doing this? Where they're having fans generate Scream scenes of themselves. And I mean, okay. And I mean, I'm not so innocent myself either. I've been guilty of using AI when I first started, until I actually learned and educated myself and realized the damage that AI actually causes. But yeah. So no, I don't hate people who use AI. There's going to be a time that comes when I hope everyone wakes up and is like, oh shit, AI is actually fucked. A big thank you to those who submitted to the podcast. Make sure to get those questions in. Remember to keep it respectful and honest. Check out the links in bio on the podcast socials, and support a homosexual in need by buying some merch. You can represent the podcast and get the word out even more. But until next time, I will scare you all on the next episode. We are nuts.
Thank you for tuning into the Scream Society podcast, hosted, written, produced, and edited by yours truly, Ralph Anthony. Help the society grow by subscribing on your favorite platform and leave a rating and review. I always strive for 5s. Have a horror or paranormal experience? Want me to answer your questions on the show? Submit to beacons.ai/The Scream Society. Connect with the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Scream Society Podcast. And until next time, I'll scare you on the next episode.